2 decades have passed, yet the story of Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie still feels unfinished. Their marriage was once loud, reckless, and unforgettable, but the way it ended left a silence no one could explain. Billy Bob stayed quiet for years, avoiding questions and hiding behind jokes about living in hotels after every divorce. But time changes people. And recently he finally spoke about the truth he once ran from, and what he revealed about their breakup shows a side of their marriage the public never saw. Before Angelina, Jolie changed the direction of his life. Billy Bob Thornton was already a man shaped by a long history of broken relationships and emotional instability. By the time he met her on the set of Pushing 10 in 1999, he had already been married 4 times, and each marriage left behind its own scars and unresolved regrets. His first wife, Melissa Lee Gatlin, married him in 1978 when he was still a struggling young artist trying to survive in Hollywood. They had a daughter, Amanda, but the marriage collapsed within 2 years. Billy later admitted he wasn't a good partner back then. Weighed down by insecurity, infidelity, and the pressure of trying to build a career from nothing, Amanda grew up estranged from him, creating wounds that would echo through his life. After Melissa came actress Toni Lawrence. That marriage also lasted barely 2 years from 1986 to 1988. Billy's career still had no real stability, and he spent most of his time hustling for work, staying up late, writing scripts, and taking whatever small roles he could find. Love didn't have room to breathe in that kind of environment. Then came Williams, an actress who starred with him in One False Move. Their relationship was built on creative chemistry, but not long-term compatibility. They divorced in 1992, with both later saying they should never have married at all. His fourth marriage to former Playboy model Petra Dawn Cherniak was the most turbulent. They married in 1993, had 2 sons, and seemed stable from the outside. But by 1997, the marriage ended in a bitter divorce filled with allegations of emotional and physical mistreatment. Billy denied the accusations, but the damage to his reputation, to the family, and to himself was already done. By the late 90s, Billy was a man who feared he wasn't built for marriage. His relationships burned fast, hard, and painfully. He often joked that every time he got divorced, he hid at the Sunset Marquis Hotel. But underneath the humor was someone who carried guilt, insecurity, and a feeling that love always slipped through his fingers. And then Angelina Jolie appeared. Young, intense, unpredictable, and everything changed again when Angelina arrived. When Angelina Jolie walked onto the set of Pushing 10 in 1999, Billy Bob Thornton was 44 years old, already weathered by life, and engaged to actress Laura Dern. Angelina was 24, fearless, already carrying the reputation of Hollywood's wild child, and building a rising career that made her impossible to ignore. No one expected the two of them to collide, but they did, and the impact was immediate. People who worked on the film later described an electric shift whenever they were together, a chemistry that didn't build slowly, but erupted instantly. It was the kind of connection that didn't wait for logic or timing. There was only one problem. Billy wasn't free. Laura Dern was away filming when the relationship between Billy and Angelina deepened. What happened next became one of Hollywood's coldest breakup stories. Without warning and without a conversation, Billy married Angelina in Las Vegas in May 2000. Laura later said, "She found out the same way the rest of the world did through the news. I left our home to work on a movie," she said, "and while I was away, my boyfriend got married. I never heard from him again. It was sudden, it was brutal, and it cast a dark shadow over Billy and Angelina's new marriage from the very beginning. But once they were together, they were inseparable. They praised each other constantly, stayed glued to each other's sides, and behaved like the world outside didn't exist. Angelina would visit him on sets just to be near him. They refused to be apart for more than a few hours. Their connection was intense, obsessive, and at times overwhelming, both for them and for everyone watching in public. The passion looked unstoppable, but privately, something else was already forming, a tension between who they were, how they lived, and the parts of themselves that neither had confronted. Yet their love burned bright, almost too bright, and the heat would eventually become impossible for Billy to handle. The controversies that followed. The moment Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie said, "I do," the world stopped and stared. They weren't just another Hollywood couple. They were a storm. Everything they did became a headline, and everything the press wrote made their relationship look stranger, darker, and more chaotic than it truly was. Their public displays of affection were constant and intense. At award shows, on carpets, and in interviews, they acted like they couldn't exist without each other. To fans, it was passionate. To critics, it was excessive. And to the media, it was pure gold. The most infamous rumor came from something simple: the necklaces with drops of each other's blood. In reality, it was nothing more than a tiny fingertip prick placed inside a small locket. Something symbolic, almost childlike in its simplicity. But once the rumor hit the tabloids, it morphed into a horror story. Reporters claimed they walked around with vials of blood dangling from their necks, and talk shows joked about them wearing buckets of blood. Billy later said it was a simple thing, but by the time the press got it, it sounded like we were wearing a bucket of blood around our necks. They were shocked at how fast a private gesture became a cultural punchline. Then there was the age gap. Angelina was 24, Billy was 44, 20 years apart. Hollywood had seen older men dating younger women, but this pairing felt different because Angelina wasn't passive or naive. She was intense, impulsive, and emotionally complex. Billy, on the other hand, was already exhausted by life. Together, they didn't look logical, but emotionally they made perfect sense. Their similarities drew them together, but their differences were starting to split them apart. And looming over everything was Laura Dern. The world hadn't forgotten how quickly Billy walked away from their engagement. That shadow followed him into his new marriage, adding another layer of controversy neither he nor Angelina bothered to explain. They stayed silent, letting rumors write the story. But that silence also created distance between them and the world, and eventually between them and each other. The breakdown behind closed doors. By 2002, the cracks in Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie's marriage were no longer just rumors. They were becoming real, even if the public couldn't see them yet. What began as an intense, all-consuming love started to slow under the weight of who they truly were. Angelina's life was accelerating. She was becoming one of the most photographed and talked about women in the world, winning an Oscar, taking on major films, and beginning to explore humanitarian work overseas. Her world was expanding at a rapid pace, and she embraced it fully. Billy, meanwhile, was shrinking into himself. He had always been a shy, anxious man who preferred small spaces, familiar routines, and quiet corners. He often described himself as agoraphobic, someone who hated crowds and public attention. While Angelina felt alive on global missions and red carpets, Billy felt overwhelmed, like he was being dragged into a lifestyle that never fit. Hers is a global lifestyle, and mine is an agoraphobic lifestyle, he later admitted. It wasn't said with bitterness, just honesty. Then came a turning point neither of them could avoid. Angelina's adoption of her first child, Maddox, in March 2002. She was ready emotionally, mentally, instinctively. Motherhood transformed her instantly. Billy was there during the adoption process, even traveling with her to Cambodia. But once they returned home, something shifted. He loved children. He wasn't afraid of responsibility. But this moment came too fast, too soon, and at a time when he was already struggling to keep up with her pace. What felt natural for Angelina felt overwhelming for him. Slowly, they began living separate emotional lives. While Angelina embraced motherhood and international activism, Billy retreated behind his music, his writing, and the quiet comfort of staying home. He began feeling insecure around her fame, her confidence, her growing presence in the world. He once confessed he felt not good enough for her, a seed of doubt that grew into distance. By the end of 2002, the couple was rarely seen together. They didn't fight publicly or have a dramatic explosion. Instead, their marriage dissolved the same way it had begun, fast, quietly, and unexpectedly. By the time the divorce was finalized in May 2003, the world was still wondering what happened. But the real reason was far sadder than anyone imagined. They loved each other deeply, but they were built for different lives. The real reason, he finally admitted. For nearly 20 years, the world tried to guess why Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie fell apart so quickly. Some blamed their age gap, Others pointed to their whirlwind romance or the controversies that became tabloid obsessions. But when Billy finally spoke openly about their divorce, the truth turned out to be far simpler and far sadder than the rumors. "We just had different lifestyles," he said, and those 5 words explained everything their marriage had become. Angelina was built for a life lived outward. She was fearless, restless, and driven by a desire to make an impact beyond Hollywood. Even in her 20s, she was already traveling to war zones, adopting children, and shaping a public identity that demanded constant movement, visibility, and emotional courage. She thrived on new experiences, new challenges, and new versions of herself. Billy was the opposite, a man shaped by trauma, failed marriages, and lifelong anxiety. He found comfort only in stillness. He preferred private spaces, familiar routines, and a world small enough to control. Fame overwhelmed him. Big crowds drained him. Public life, even when he was successful, made him want to hide. He often joked that after every divorce, he disappeared into the Sunset Marquis Hotel. The joke was funny. The truth behind it wasn't. Angelina needed a partner who could stand beside her in the world. Billy needed a partner who could sit beside him in the quiet. Those needs weren't compatible, no matter how deeply they cared for each other. And that's what Billy finally admitted. There was no scandal, no betrayal, no sudden fight. They simply grew in opposite directions. The media exaggerated many things about their marriage, but Billy made one thing clear. The love itself was real. "I look at that time as a great time," he said. "Angie is still a friend of mine, and she's a wonderful person." He even defended her against years of public misconceptions, insisting their so-called wild marriage was far less outrageous than it was portrayed. The infamous blood necklaces. He described them as small lockets holding a drop of blood, nothing more. In the end, the tragedy wasn't what happened between them. It was everything that could have happened if they'd met at a different time in their lives. Life after Angelina and the peace he finally found. After the divorce was finalized in 2003, Billy Bob Thornton disappeared from public view for a while. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way he always did after his life became too loud. The world kept talking about Angelina, her rising fame, her growing family, and the global work that would eventually define her career. But Billy took a different path, one that led him away from cameras, controversy, and the chaos that once followed him everywhere. He focused on music again, returning to the comfort of songwriting and performing with his band, the Box Masters. Music had always been the place where he felt safe, where his anxiety softened and his thoughts made sense. Acting remained part of his life, but he gravitated more toward roles that offered depth without demanding the constant attention that came with blockbuster fame. He didn't chase the spotlight. He had already learned the cost of living inside it. Not long after his marriage to Angelina ended, Billy met Connie England, a quiet, grounded woman who worked behind the scenes in the film industry. She wasn't a celebrity, and she never tried to be. Her world was calm, steady, predictable, the exact opposite of the whirlwind he had just survived. For the first time, Billy felt he didn't have to perform. He didn't have to match someone else's speed or live up to the weight of someone else's fame. With Connie, he could simply exist. They spent more than a decade together before marrying in 2014. They have a daughter, Bella, and built a private life that fits him in a way nothing ever had before. "She's my speed," he once said. A simple statement, but one that revealed everything he had spent years trying to find. Meanwhile, Angelina Jolie moved into an entirely different chapter. Motherhood, humanitarian work, directing, and raising 6 children. Their lives diverged so completely that it became obvious their marriage never stood a chance. They weren't meant for the same kind of life, but that didn't make what they had any less real. And even with all the years behind them, Billy still speaks about their marriage with warmth, not regret. Time didn't erase the past. It simply softened it.